Hey guys, so this is part of your Module 6, Chemistry and Biology, and in Lesson 1, we're going to be talking about matter. So for Lesson 1, our focus question is what makes up everything around us? So you really want to think about, when we're talking about things around us, we're talking about atoms, we're talking about the matter that makes up these atoms, and remember, everything is made up of matter. So the universe is made up of matter and energy, and everything that has mass, from our own planet Earth to the furthest star, is made up of atoms. Now, these tiny building blocks compose mountains and rainforests, plants and animals. So the atoms in your own body have been around for billions of years, and most likely were produced in these ancient stars. Now, let's talk about atoms for a little bit here. So to break this down, first of all, anything that has to do with atoms has to do with chemistry, which is the study of matter, its composition, and its properties. So if you remember, matter is anything that has mass and takes up space. So all organisms that you study in biology are made of matter. The smallest of bacteria to the largest of mammals, like the blue whale, they are all made of matter. Now, atoms are the building blocks of life. So when we're taking a look at this, atoms are the building block of all matter that exists. Again, everything from the smallest to the biggest is composed of these atoms. Now, an atom is so small that billions of them could fit on the head of a pin. Yet, atoms are made of even smaller particles called neutrons, protons, and electrons. So if we take a look, neutrons and protons are located in the nucleus of the atom. And the nucleus just refers to the center of the atom. This is where most of our mass is actually composed of. Now, electrons are the negatively charged particles that are found on the outside of the nucleus. So in this case, electrons are kind of flying around. These are the ones that are responsible for all the bonding that exists between atoms. So protons are positively charged, and we can write that as P positive. Okay, usually their charge, or not usually, always their charge is +1. Now also in the nucleus, we have neutrons. And neutrons are particles that have no charge, so we usually write them as a charge of 0. Now, electrons, on the other hand, are what balance this whole thing. So they are negatively charged particles of a charge of -1. So in this entire system, you can have a hydrogen atom, which is composed of 1 proton and 1 electron, but no neutrons, or you can have your oxygen atom that has 8 protons, 8 neutrons in the nucleus, and 8 electrons. Notice that the positive 8 protons is balanced out by the negative 8 electrons in order to make a total charge of 0. So the same thing occurs, for example, if you have an atom of aluminum. Now, aluminum has 13 electrons. So therefore, it is going to need 13 protons in order to become neutral. So here's our entire system that we have here, right? So in this system, it's composed of a nucleus that has neutrons and protons and electrons. Inside of that nucleus, again, we have these two particles of neutrons, which are neutrally charged or no charge whatsoever, protons, which are positively charged, and electrons, which are negatively charged. Now, what you will notice as the grand scheme of this is that we still have our 2 protons and we have our 2 electrons, and again, this creates us with a grand total of 0 for. So let's model an oxygen atom. So oxygen's symbol is O, and it has an atomic number of 8, indicating that it has 8 protons and has an atomic mass of 16. So remember, your atomic mass is the protons plus the neutrons. So inside of the nucleus, we are going to have a grand total of 16 particles. All right. Now, 8 of these particles are going to be positively charged. And those are our protons. The other ones, I'm not going to put anything there because those are the neutrons of this. So remember, the positive particles are our protons. The ones that have no charge would be our neutrons. Now, since we have 8 positively charged particles, we are also going to have 8 negatively charged particles, which are our electrons. Now, when we're drawing electrons, we have to look at what energy level these particles are located in. So, for example, in our first energy level, we can have 2 electrons that are found there. And in the rest of the energy levels, we can have up to 8. So in the case of oxygen, we only have 6 particles, so only 6 electrons can be filled inside of the outer shell. So these negatively charged particles are called electrons. Now, in our oxygen molecule, the overall charge of this atom is neutral or 0 because the atom has an equal amount of protons and electrons. So since protons are positive and electrons are negative, that creates a net neutral molecule for anything that has that equal number of protons and electrons. So an element is a pure substance that cannot be broken down into other substances by chemical or physical means, meaning we cannot split or break up an atom and we can't change its chemical composition. So elements are made of only one type of atom, whether that is a carbon, a hydrogen, a helium. One type is only making that up. Now, elements are combined in different ways to form the products and compounds that make up everything on Earth. And if we take a look here at these 2 bars, okay, both of these bars represent oxygen. The orange one represents in the Earth's crust, and the blue one represents our organisms. So you'll notice, even though hydrogen is the highest in living organisms, you can also see between the 2 that oxygen makes up the bulk of all the matter on this planet. So if we take a look at the human body, right? The human body is made up of 65% oxygen. Okay, so you can see that's the highest amount. Whereas in our Earth's crust, it makes up about close to 47% oxygen. And even in the atmosphere, 21% of our atmosphere is made of oxygen. So this makes oxygen the most prevalent of all of the atoms in or elements in the universe. Now, that brings us to the periodic table. Now, the periodic table is organized into horizontal rows, which are called periods, and vertical columns, which are called groups. Each individual block on the periodic table falls within one of these periods and groups, and it allows us to identify where they are located. So each individual block on the periodic table tells us a few things. First of all, the atomic mass. So our atomic mass would be this right here. And what that atomic mass does is that atomic mass is the number of protons plus the number of neutrons, but it is a weighted average. So we're looking at all the different combinations we can have, not necessarily number of protons, but we can change the number of neutrons in some, which gives us like a 1.08. The other thing we can look at is the atomic number. The atomic number tells us the number of protons that are found in this element. So hydrogen's atomic number is 1, therefore it has 1 proton. Helium is 2 protons. Lithium, 3 protons. Beryllium, 4 protons, and so on and so forth. The last thing it's going to show us is our symbol, and our symbol is an abbreviation of 1 or 2 letters abbreviating that element. So hydrogen, capital H, the first one's always capitalized, represents hydrogen. Helium would be capital H, lowercase e. Lithium, Li. So you get, this is the way that we can organize and condense all these things. Now, the table is called the periodic table because elements in the same group have similar chemical and physical properties. So this is the trend that we're looking at here, that the table is arranged so that these elements are arranged that when we're looking at them, they have similar properties, both chemical and physical. So this organization even allows scientists to predict the properties of elements that have not yet been discovered. So these guys right here, 1 to 7, these are what we call periods, all right? And the ones on the top, the ones that are going from 1 to 18, these are our groups. And the groups are kind of arranged in a way that shows reactivity. So that leads us to isotopes. And remember, an isotope is something or an atom of the same element that have different number of neutrons. So for example, these are 3 different isotopes of carbon. Now remember, carbon is distinguished by the number of protons that are found in the nucleus. In this case, every single one of the carbons will have 6 protons, but the atomic mass can change based on the number of neutrons. So remember, neutrons are found in the nucleus as well. So 6 plus 6 gives us an atomic mass of 12. 6 plus 7 gives us an atomic mass of 13. And 6 plus 8 gives us an atomic mass of 14. This is what we're referring to as an isotope, the different number of neutrons found in the nucleus, giving us a different atomic mass. So when we take a look at this, right, we can see this a little more clearly in the picture here. So the red represents our protons, and they are always the same, 666 for carbon, because carbon's atomic number is 6. The thing that changes is our neutrons, which is the number of neutrally charged particles in the nucleus, which increases our atomic mass 12, 13, and 14. So that leads us to what are referred to as radioactive isotopes. And these are used in the medical field for looking at things inside of our body. So the changing number of neutrons can actually affect the stability of the nucleus. And in some cases, the nucleus will actually decay or begin to break down or break apart. So when a nucleus breaks apart, it gives off radiation that can be detected. And you can see that radiation in this mapping right here of the different levels. So an isotope that gives off radiation are called radioactive isotopes. And again, with these radioactive isotopes, now that leads us to a radioactive isotope of carbon-14 that is found in all living things. So scientists know the exact amount of time that it takes for the half of carbon-14 to decay. We refer to this as the half-life of carbon-14. And because we know this amount, we can then use this to calculate the age of an object by finding how much carbon-14 remains in the sample. So let's just say, for example, we find a bone underground, and we want to know how old is this bone. So what we can do is we can take a sample of this bone, and we can use this to measure the amount of carbon-14. And by doing this, this can give us the age of the object to determine how old that object really is. So after looking at carbon-14 dating, let's compare and contrast the characteristics of carbon-14 by completing the following sentences. Structurally, carbon-14 differs from other carbon compounds because it has a different number of neutrons. So it has a different number of neutrons than other carbons, which means it has a different atomic mass. Now, this makes carbon-14 radioactive because its nucleus is unstable and decays. So its nucleus decays and breaks apart. Now, knowing the half-life of carbon-14, which is the time it takes to break down the nucleus's mass by half, enables scientists to calculate the age of an object that was once living. So radioactive isotopes are extremely important in terms of calculating once living things. Now this leads us to compounds. Now elements can combine to form more complex substances, and when we combine these things, a compound is a pure substance formed when two or more different elements combined. So this could be like water, which is H2O, or sodium chloride, which is table salt, which is NaCl. But either way, a compound is a pure substance formed when two or more different elements combine together. Now, compounds have very unique properties. First of all, compounds are always formed from a specific combination of elements in a fixed ratio. So what this refers to as like H2O, it will always be two hydrogens to one oxygen in order to make water. Again, it's always in the same ratio. We're never going to have H3O or HO2. Even though those are different elements, water is always H2O. Compounds are chemically and physically different from the elements that comprise them. So for example, sodium, Na, that is a very reactive metal that when exposed to water will actually explode. Chlorine is a deadly gas that will destroy our membrane system inside of our body. Add them together, we put that on food and create salt. Those properties are significantly different than its original parts. Compounds cannot be broken down into simpler compounds or elements by physical means. In other words, you can't just take a knife and cleave off a hydrogen. It's not how it works. And finally, compounds can be broken down by chemical means into simpler compounds or elements. All right, so we can do chemical reactions in order to break them or build different compounds or elements. So an example of this is actually a process called electrolysis, which is the creating of hydrogen gas and oxygen from water. So in other words, we are breaking down water into its original parts. One of them creates hydrogen gas, the other one creates oxygen gas. And that is done from breaking down water plus electricity. So in electrolysis, water produces hydrogen gas that can be used for hydrogen fuel cells. So even though we are breaking it down, it's still considered a compound because we're breaking it down by chemical means. So that leads us to chemical bonds. And compounds such as water are formed when two or more substances combined. The force that holds these substances together is called a chemical bond. Now, atoms are made of protons, neutrons, and electrons, and the electrons, here's something that's really important, the electrons are involved directly in forming a chemical bond. The electrons are the things that are actually holding the bond together in these bonds that are forming. So, you could talk about sharing or transferring bonds. Either way, electrons create the reactivity of the element. Now, electrons travel around the nucleus of the atom in these areas called energy levels. Now, energy levels are just kind of referring to where they believe the electrons are going to be found. So we have two different types of energy levels in this type. We have energy level number one and our second energy level. Now, when we're talking about energy levels, remember our first energy level can only hold two electrons in the outer shell. So, for example, here we can draw two electrons, and that is the most amount that can be filled in that. In the second energy level, it can hold 8 electrons. And once that energy level is full, it becomes stable, and we now, partially filled energy levels is not as stable as energy levels that are empty or filled. So we always want to have one of those energy levels ending or filling to its absolute max. Atoms become more stable by losing electrons or by attracting electrons from other atoms. So forming a chemical bond that stores energy and the breaking of chemical bonds that provide energy for processes such as growth, development, adaptation, reproduction of living things. So forming bonds stores energy, breaking bonds releases energy. Now, to show you how much some of these elements actually want to react, is this, I believe, is sodium. And what you'll notice is when sodium reacts with water, it wants to get rid of its electron at all costs. And sometimes it does so in an explosive nature.
Oh!
You can see how violently that metal wants to get rid of those electrons in order to become more stable in an explosive manner. Now, if we take a look, we have two main types of chemical bonds that we're going to look at. Ionic bonds, which is the transfer of electrons in order to create stability, and covalent bonds, which is the sharing of electrons in order to become more stable. So again, in this sense, in an ionic bond, we are moving an electron to another atom. And in doing so, that negative electron is gone. We become more positive, the one that loses an electron, and more negative, the one that gains an electron, which creates almost like a magnet effect of opposites attract. Covalent bonds, when we're sharing electrons, we share these electrons between the two in order to get both of those atoms to its stable nature. Let's look a little closer at ionic bonds. And the first thing we have to realize and kind of know is what is an ion? An ion is something that carries an electrical charge. So in an ionic bond, atoms are going to lose or gain one or more electrons, and they then, when they lose or gain that electron, become an ion. So if we take a look and we take a look at this electron down here, what we'll notice is that electron is going to be transferred to chlorine. And as it's transferred to chlorine, chlorine now gains another negative particle, which then makes this a charge of -1. Now, uh, sodium, on the other hand, is losing an electron, so that is going to become more positive. These are the ions that are forming the bond in this structure. So when an atom gives away an electron, that then becomes more positive. So again, gaining an electron is gaining a negative particle. Losing or giving away an electron is reducing the number of negative particles, which creates a positively charged ion. Now, when an atom accepts that electron from the donor, it becomes more negative. So in this case, the sodium is becoming more positive because it loses the negative electron. And we see that right here. And chlorine becomes more negative because it's gaining another negative electron. So looking at an ionic bond, this is an electrical attraction between two oppositely charged atoms called ions. So looking at this down here, all right, and when we are looking at is the number of protons and electrons in the molecule. So sodium and chlorine, we can see here, sodium has 11 protons and 11 electrons. Chlorine has 17 protons and 17 electrons. So, therefore, they have a neutral charge. Now, when this electron is transferred to chlorine, we are now reducing that to 11 protons and 10 electrons, creating a positive charge for sodium. Gaining an electron by chlorine now has one extra negative particle, which creates a negative charge. The positive and the negative then attract, kind of like how magnets attract in the same way, opposites attract. In ionic bonds, the formation of ions is really important. Now, something to remember here with ions is that protons are positively charged and electrons are negatively charged. So, in the formation of positive and negatively charged particles, the losing and gaining of electrons are what is responsible for this. So, when atoms become more positively charged, that means that we are losing electrons. So, since we are losing negatively charged particles, the atom has more protons and electrons, meaning it is more positive. A positively charged ion is called a cation. Now, atoms also become more negatively charged when they gain electrons. So, if you gain an electron from another atom, you now have more electrons than protons, which makes it more negative. And another name for this is called an anion. So ions in living things include sodium, potassium, calcium, chloride, and carbonate ions. These are things that are important, and this is why you drink electrolyte drinks like Gatorade. They help to maintain homeostasis. And if you remember, homeostasis is the word for maintaining internal conditions. So when you are maintaining homeostasis, you are keeping your body in a balanced state. So what they do is they help to transmit electrical signals among cells that allow you to see, taste, hear, and feel. In other words, this is really important in our nervous system. Our nervous system is controlled by these electrical signals and neurons that are fired along this in order to communicate further down the line. Now, the next type of bond that we're going to look at are covalent bonds, and covalent bonds have to do with sharing the electrons. So, in other words, if we take a look at this water molecule over here, what you'll notice is there are two sets of electrons shared between the oxygen and the two hydrogen molecules. Those shared electrons are shared between the hydrogen and the oxygen in order to fulfill each one of their outer valence shells. So most compounds in living organisms have covalent bonds holding them together. And water and other substances within covalent bonds are called molecules. Molecules is the fancy word for a compound in which the atoms are held together by a covalent bond. So all molecules are compounds, but not all compounds are molecules. Now, when we're looking at molecules which are held together by, remember, covalent bonds, they are held together with three different types: single, double, and triple bonds. So a single bond is like these two hydrogens here, which have a single line together. And you'll notice that there are two electrons being shared between them. In a double bond, they're usually represented by two lines in between. Each one of those lines represents two electrons being shared in order to fulfill its valence shell. Finally, we have triple bonds, which are three lines in between, indicating six electrons being shared between them. This is also why covalent bonds and molecules can form these really large, really complex structures. So let's compare ionic covalent bonds. So first of all, when we're looking at covalent bonds, this involves sharing electrons between them. Same thing, these electrons are being shared. Now, ionic bonds involve a complete transfer. So an electron is being transferred from one atom to another. And what this does is it creates ions. And remember, we have positive and negative ions which form the bond. So the next thing is that covalent bonds usually have a lower melting point. And what this means is they tend to melt at a lower temperature. So for example, sugar melts at a much lower temperature than salt does, which is an ionic compound. And again, this has to do with the relative strength of the charge. So A covalent bond like sugar melts at about 100 degrees centigrade, while table salt melts at about 800. So covalent bonds can be solid, liquids, or gases at room temperature, but polar covalent solids are crystalline solids. Nonpolar covalent solids can be candle wax. They tend to be softer. Now, ionic bonds tend to be very brittle and crystalline at room temperature, and many are white solids like salt. Some ionic compounds form colorful solids such as blue-green copper or chloride crystals. Covalent bonds, non-covalent compounds do not dissolve in water like oil or fat, and they do not interact strongly enough with water to pull them out of the solution. Polar covalent compounds can be dissolved in water. This would be like sugar can be dissolved, but oil can't. The polar parts of the sugar molecule interact strongly with the polar molecules in order to pull out that solution, whereas ionic compounds, many of them dissolve easily in water, and salt water is a mixture of covalent water molecules and positive sodium ions and negative chloride. So that is how they actually mix them together. The other thing is that covalent solutions don't conduct electricity. So while chemical processes can ionize some covalent compounds in water, if a dissolved compound does not contact the current, you can be sure it is covalent. Whereas ionic compounds, they will conduct the current. Remember, water is a covalent compound, does not conduct that as well. So, in summary, elements are pure substances made up of only one type of atom. Isotopes are forms of the same element that have different number of neutrons. Compounds are substances with unique properties that are formed when elements combined, and elements can form covalent and ionic bonds. Okay, so remember, molecules are all compounds, but compounds are not all molecules. So hopefully this helps you up with lesson 1, which has to do with matter in our module 6 chapter.